Welcome to the Post-Capitalist Workplace podcast, hosted by Anuradha, a leading accessibility strategist supporting organizations of today to become organizations of the future. In Season 1, we'll explore what accessibility truly means at its core, as well as the crucial role it plays in decolonizing organizations. While Season 2 spotlights real-world examples of impactful accessibility initiatives and why they're key to addressing some of society's biggest challenges. Welcome, everybody. We're back for Episode 2. Today, I really wanted to dive into the core question of what is accessibility and how focusing on it improves the situation for all of us. So before we get into the juicy question, which is where I want to end up at, is how is accessibility tied to a post-capitalist workplace? I'm going to be building on that question in the next few episodes, and I'll give you a little preview towards the end of this episode. But I wanted to start with the working definition of accessibility. So when I'm thinking about that question, a lot of people don't have necessarily all the basics or understand it. We certainly might feel it when we're experiencing the barriers that come from inaccessibility or lack of inclusion. We might see those barriers sometimes, but sometimes we might not understand the whole framework. And that's what I'm going to spend a little time talking about. I really like the idea of using working definitions because as awesome as certain dictionaries can be, they are often rooted in supremacy culture because the people writing these books are from institutions. So they are dictating how language is being used and codifying it in a specific moment. So who's written the dictionary? How is it being edited? What are the biases? They're generally going to come from dominant culture. And what I think is more effective, especially when we're having a conversation, which this podcast can be seen as a conversation, that having a shared definition of our terms certainly helps. And you'll see that in a little while. The person helping me with my website is helping me put together a small glossary on my website. So the shared definitions will be there that I use the most frequently, especially around social justice language. First, let's give a little bit of framing to that most people fundamentally misunderstand accessibility as something that only relates to disabled or visibly disabled individuals. And that's not true. True accessibility is rooted in disability justice frameworks and based on the social model of disability and applies an intersectional lens to ensure inclusivity for all. And this is some words actually from my website. The reason I wanted to share this with you is we're going to unpack some of these words over the course of this season and some today. But just think back to the pandemic. That it was really important. We saw during that time a global phenomenon that we came together and that we wanted to keep people safe. And so it was important that we created accommodations almost overnight in some cases to support ourselves, our teams, our clients, and our communities. This all had to be built, and thank goodness we had some of the technology rise to meet us through that challenge. Just like that, a lot of times the barriers we might be overlooking might be cultural, linguistic, racial, neurodivergent, body size needs, and so on. We're going to go into some of the examples in a little while and what disability justice might look like. However, it's really important when we're thinking about this working definition that the practice of designing products and services and our environments that are usable by individuals with a wide range of abilities and needs, ensuring everyone has equal access to opportunities and experiences. This is the kind of working definition I present to you. And that means sometimes it might look like price accessibility. It might look like time zone accessibility. It might be a ramp. It might be closed captioning. And this helps us equalize the experience so people aren't facing additional barriers and not having the additional support they need to rise to meet that challenge. So therefore, people are doing unnecessary labor to get to the same place everyone else has for their starting point. And that's really the heart of this. Since I do a lot of report writing in my work, or I am looking at systems from an accessibility lens, there are a lot of things we need to consider. And we're going to talk more about that over the course of the next few episodes. So the reason I wanted to do an episode on this was because in this rebrand process, I also did a little bit of SEO digging. What is on people's minds when they're looking at accessibility? What do they know? What do they need to know? And of course, this is laying the groundwork for me to then introduce what is a post-capitalist workplace? What is that? What does it look like? And we'll talk more about that in episode 4, but we really need a strong foundation, a shared foundation. And that's what I'm bringing here. So while I was doing this SEO research, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to Meg Casebolt because I did a workshop with her in her online community and it was delightful. It was disappointing in a way to realize how many people were looking for terms like accessibility and what is accessibility, but not really looking for some of the deeper solutions, which are pillars of my work. And I'm going to talk about what those pillars might be a little later, of course. This is not to tease you, but I want to put first things first. So we're all in that shared definition space. So while I'm super excited people are asking, I'm also realizing just how far we have to go. So the next episode, episode 3, I'm going to be diving into, before we even get into the door of our workplace or log into our portal for work, what are all the barriers, and name them and talk a little bit about the historical significance of some of these barriers. Then in episode 4, we'll talk about paint a picture of what the next iteration can look like, what a post-capitalist workplace might look like. So with that in mind, I really wanted to dive into the question is, how do we release these barriers and how do we overcome them to get to a post-capitalist workplace? Well, before we actually take any action, we have to recognize, do we have the symptoms? So what are the symptoms of an inaccessible workplace? These are some of the things that I've seen. Generally, they all tie back to low trust. So this might be low repeat business and low public trust. This might be low morale and high employee turnover, especially for diverse staff. Increased reputational damage, a lack of clarity on the vision and direction and action around accessibility or the wider DEI work, unchallenged perceptions of bias around gender, disability, race, and so on, a toxic culture in the workplace, a lack of funding or budget for inclusion and accessibility work, and a fear of lawsuits or legal action around your lack of compliance. So those are some of the things that we are working with. Those are symptoms. We can go treat the root cause, but we need to acknowledge that's where many organizations might be starting. It can be really overwhelming in this late stage capitalist hellscape to deliver results to your customers and end users while figuring out an accessibility plan that is tailored to your organization, your direction of travel, your needs, and your budget. However, we're still on the hook for delivering against certain provisions, whether those be local laws or national laws or worldwide guidelines, like for website accessibility, for instance. So that's why I've created this podcast, to acknowledge there's never going to be a perfect time for us to start this process. It's going to be messy, uncomfortable, and even sometimes overwhelming. But it's important to start now rather than doing nothing at all. And a really important piece that I wanted to share here is If your organization isn't accessible, you might be missing out on opportunities, building relationships that are both inside your organization and with external stakeholders. Companies and organizations who are addressing inclusion and accessibility are seeing the impact on their bottom line. So that's why I created this podcast, to really dig into that, because organizations who are addressing inclusion and accessibility are seeing the impact to their bottom line, to their employee satisfaction, to the creativity and impact of their workplace to be more delightful and joyful, and to be part of the solution for an equitable future for all of us. So let's unpack some of the terms we talked about a little earlier. First of all, disability justice frameworks. That's a great search term. So if you want to play around with that a little, you can put that into a search engine and take a look. But basically, the essence of that are tenets from the disability community that are all summarized into a few words here. Nothing for us without us. Meaning, a lot of times we have seen over and over with different marginalized groups where decisions about their life, their well-being, their work is not decided by them. It is decided by someone else on their behalf. And they might not have their best interest at heart. Essentially, the disability community has put together some strong tenets that actually align quite nicely with the Kota constellation and our principles and philosophy. And these are that we co-produce our work, meaning we are listening to the communities impacted and we're asking them for input at every stage, and we're reiterating and working with them that we're taking their opinions on as very important, and we're working collaboratively to meet their needs. One of our most important pillars is accessibility is a key part of dismantling the systems of oppression. This is not a side quest in our work. This is the main quest, because as we give voice to and space for future leaders, the people who have been historically relegated to the sidelines, a lot of the amazing solutions that might be coming come from this group. And as we challenge these systems of accessibility, and we're looking at accessibility from a vestige of how capitalism and colonialism were first created, the roots of having these barriers in the workplace and in other aspects of our life and relationships stems directly from capitalism and colonialism. So when we frame accessibility as part of the work of dismantling systems of oppression and dismantling these barriers that were intentionally created by highlighting difference, essentially that's what capitalism and colonialism did, is they exploited difference around gender, around sex, around race, around disability, and they exploited them. So then there was a division there, and certain people were given a lot more power, access, resources, and certain people were not. And that exploitation of difference is what we address at its heart when we address accessibility. Accessibility can help us dismantle not only the biases and propaganda and history and years of rules and difficulty certain groups have faced. We're actually righting those wrongs, but we're telling a new narrative, saying those barriers, we don't want to separate people based on these differences. We don't want to exclude people, and we want a different practice going forward. We want a different life going forward, and we can reimagine our workplaces. That model is outmoded, doesn't work right now, and doesn't speak to the beauty of humanity and the diversity of humanity. And we can make a business case for doing this. We can also make a moral or ethical case for this. But I think even more fundamental than that, the creativity and the purpose and the kind of diversity, when we have diversity of thought in the room, the atmosphere changes. It is no longer competitive and toxic. It becomes fun. It becomes delightful. It becomes joy making. We enjoy coming to work. We enjoy making a difference. That's what I think we can all tap into. And that's one of the main pillars of this. Another pillar is what we're doing each and every day matters. And this is not just from disability advocate spaces. This is one of my pillars. The things that we do every day matter a great deal more than what we do once a year. And that might be showing people we care through a mental health event once a year is good. But if we're not embedding that so then people who do have mental health challenges are being supported every day, then it doesn't actually translate into meaningful implementation and meaningful change on the ground. And one of the heart of our tenets is everyone deserves a delightful experience. One of our main goals is to make accessible and inclusive in-person and digital experiences that make people feel welcomed and valued and belong, and they feel joyful. A way that we can start to create this, another tenet of ours, is psychological safety, that is so important that we meet people where they are. We ensure they feel safe because we're building a compassionate space where we are listening. That doesn't mean that this is a safe place. It's a brave space that we need to be courageous in showing up. We might make some missteps, but it's important that we are rising to the challenge of making sure people feel safe, including ourselves, including our staff. When we're engaged in topics that are sometimes difficult, sometimes there is tension, and acknowledging that, but can we still do what we can to ensure that safety? As we create safety, we also create room for nuance to challenge colonial and capitalistic cis heteropatriarchal values. That instead of seeing this as us against each other and so on, and labeling each other as a problem, we look at the problem as the obstacle we want to overcome, and we work together facing the problem. So we are working in cooperation with each other, not fighting, infighting. This is a huge shift. And if we don't have safety, then we can't build the space for nuance to challenge things. And that's really an important tenet of all of this work. A lot of people in this society tend to think we can create a better space by avoiding conflict. And so a lot of our society, and here I'm based in England, that's even more true, that sometimes conflict is not seen as a good thing. But sometimes conflict can be really important because it helps us to build the psychological safety as we address it together. That can actually heal rupture and create space for even more safety because we looked at something together and we didn't just run for either run towards avoidance or run in the other way of kind of wearing rose-colored glasses that everything is okay. Those are the two extremes, but we're actually putting guardrails on things when we say, hey, there's space for rupture here and there's space for us to heal it. A really important tenet is we center the needs of the historically marginalized. And this can be QTI POC, queer, trans, intersex people of color, disabled people, neurodivergent people, and people with mental health challenges, and so on. So those are important that we not only listen to them, we center their needs. Because as we improve the situation for them, we'll often see people who don't have those identities and don't have those access needs, the situation improves. Just like when we think of putting in a ramp, the ramp can help for a wheelchair user, absolutely. But it can also improve the situation for someone who is using a cane or a walker. It can help with someone who is stumbling as they walk, maybe an elderly person or a child learning to walk, for instance. It can help with people with luggage or people with strollers or other baby moving devices, right? So this improves the situation for so many people. In doing that, improves the situation for everyone. Another important tenet that I often bring up is imperfect action and iteration is better than just keeping theory, keeping shelf knowledge, right? We've read a bunch of books But actually, until we get into the nitty-gritty and actually work on clarity, accountability, and listening and refining as we go, we're not going to get it right, right? So this is a really important aspect of our work. And then, as I mentioned earlier, co-creation with our stakeholders, with the people who are actually going to be using the experience, the device, the whatever the thing is, who is going to be interacting in our space. It's really important that we co-create with them. And this goes hand in hand with the next one, that we're honoring people with lived experience. That in our society, we often highlight or consider academic knowledge or on-the-job training as more important or more valuable than lived experience. However, lived experience experts are crucial to uprooting systems of harm and building something new. So with that in mind, you'll have a really rich idea of what accessibility might mean in your workplace now and what it would look like. Maybe you'll have the little wisps of ideas of what it might look like going forward. I'm realizing that I have spoken a little bit more on this topic than I had intended to. That's okay, no worries. But I urge you to come back for the next episode. As I mentioned last time, I'm already looking forward to episode 3. We're going to be talking about it can't be that bad. What's the real barriers that exist for people in the workplace? And this is going to be really comprehensive. I've been imagining this episode for quite some time. And then the following episode, we'll start to share painting a picture of what a post-capitalist workplace might look like. So that's what's on tap this time. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. Let's connect and continue the discussion on our website.